Ukraine's foreign minister spoke after Guterres, where Dmitry Kuleba urged the international community to rally behind Kiev.
Mr. President, you have chosen the word hope as a motto for your presidency. The same feeling currently dominates the mindsets of Ukrainians and people around the globe. Hope for peace. Hope for common sense to prevail. Hope for diplomacy to ease tensions. However, today we need much more than hope. We need swift, concrete, and resolute actions. A new type of actions by the United Nations and international community which is relevant to the level of the threat we all, not just Ukraine, face today because of Russia's aggressive course.
Well, for the very latest on ground in Ukraine, we can now cross live to the capital, Kiev, where Associated Press correspondent Francesca Ebel actually joins us now. Thank you so much, Francesca, for being here tonight. And of course, we have seen the UN Secretary General as well as Ukraine's foreign minister really talk about the crisis there in Ukraine. But you are on ground. What can you tell us about the meeting in the United Nations House concerning the issue?
Well, today it has been a very busy day in Kiev. There have been a series of concerning developments. Russia just evacuated its embassy in Kiev. They lowered the Russian flag and now the building is surrounded by police. And this morning, Ukraine urged its citizens to leave Russia whenever is possible. The government also called for a state of emergency The reaction in Kiev has been felt.
Well, let's come back and talk about the fact that we have seen Ukraine announcing a state of emergency and also the president calling for, those between the ages of 18 to 60 to really come up to the plate. What more can you really tell us about what's happening on ground there in Kiev where you are?
Well, I was just walking through the streets of Kiev tonight, and the mood is very normal. People are going home from work. They're using public transport. There's even musicians playing music in the streets. And earlier today, I talked with some local residents, and they didn't seem as panicked as you might think, given these concerning developments today. One woman told me that she was very overwhelmed by the news cycle. She told me that she thought that the government calling for the state of emergency was the right thing to do. And another woman told me that she was ready to defend the city if needed. But all of them, when I asked them, are you scared? Are you feeling that this is a moment for you potentially to evacuate or leave with your families? They said, no, we're not scared. We're just going to carry on as normal.
Well, it's a good thing that people are not very fearful. But in the meantime, Russian president has actually opened the door to diplomacy, looking at least his address earlier today. How has that really gone down, especially with the people of Ukraine?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. Could you repeat that?
Okay, so I was asking you that earlier on today, the Russian president in his address says he's opening the door to diplomacy. And I'm asking you how this has actually gone down, especially with the people around you there in Kiev.
Well, as I said, they're not really feeling the shift so much in Kiev. Of course, in the east, they'll be feeling the difference. But in Kiev, the situation more or less remains the same on the street, at least. Having said that, we have seen in the last 48 hours a shift on the side of the Ukrainian authorities. I mean, for weeks now, they've been sort of saying that everything is calm, that everything is okay. But today and yesterday, they've made a series of decisions that have sort of added to these escalating tensions.
Right, and are people in Ukraine really satisfied, especially looking at the response from the international community, looking at the US as well as NATO allies? So far, we've seen some of the sanctions against Russia, but are the people in Ukraine satisfied with this?
The Ukrainian government definitely wants more stringent sanctions. Just today, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba wrote on Twitter, he said, "We call on partners to impose more sanctions on Russia now. We now need the pressure to step up and to stop Putin. Hit more, hit hard, hit new." And I think that really sums up the attitude of many Ukrainians, certainly the Ukrainian government, towards the sanctions that were announced yesterday. Many observers say the sanctions don't go far enough. They say, certainly on the case of the UK's sanctions, that they are quote unquote tepid. They've targeted, for example, oligarchs that have already been on the sanction list since 2018. But the Ukrainian government, they certainly would like to see stricter sanctions.
Absolutely. And of course, we're seeing this standoff between Russia and Ukraine really take center stage at the United Nations General Assembly. But before we let you go, what more do we know about the Russian troops deployment? Have they entered eastern Ukraine? And if so, can we call this an invasion now?
That is the question that lots of leaders and people are asking is does this constitute as an invasion? And I think the wording of this is very important because it will dictate the next round of economic sanctions from the West. What we know so far is that Putin has been given the approval by the Russian Federation Council to send Russian troops into these separatist territories and indeed abroad. There have been videos and reports that the troops and military vehicles have already gone into these territories, but we'll have to wait and see whether these forces actually go further and go past these regions into Ukraine.
And of course, we have seen some calls by the Ukrainian authorities to tell their citizens to actually leave Russia. From Kiev, where you are right now, can you see any citizens returning from Russia back home? Francesca?
No, I haven't seen anything of that sort here in Kiev.
All right, Francesca Ebel there. I would have to say thank you so much for keeping us updated, and please be safe out there. Francesca, Associated Press Correspondent in Kiev for Arise News Tonight.